The dinner table was set for 7. My place wasn't one of them. I noticed it the moment I walked into my parents' house that Thanksgiving. The dining table my father had built from reclaimed oak the year I was born. The one with the uneven leg he never got around to fixing. 7 chairs, my parents, my 2 older brothers, their wives, and my nephew. I stood in the doorway counting. The way you count when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling you. My mother came out of the kitchen holding a casserole dish, saw me looking, and said, "Oh, we thought you'd eat in the living room. You know how tight it gets." I had driven 4 hours for this. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and set my coat on the hook by the door the same way I had since I was 7 years old. And I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, and I stood there gripping the counter until my knuckles stopped shaking. That was the same night my father told my brothers about the garage. My grandfather had built that garage into a machine shop over 40 years. Drill presses, lathes, a TIG welder he'd imported from Germany in 1987. When he died, he left it to my father, who had kept it exactly as it was, the way people keep things they don't know what to do with. It was worth something. The equipment alone was worth something. But more than that, the building sat on the corner lot in the neighborhood that had quietly, over the past decade, become desirable. Developers had been circling it for 2 years. I knew this because I had told my father they would. I was 26 at the time, working as a real estate analyst, and I had mapped the rezoning patterns spreading north from downtown. I sat with him at this same kitchen table and showed him the projections on my laptop. He had looked at the screen for a long moment and then said, "You always did like to complicate things." That was 3 years before Thanksgiving, the night of the dinner, after the plates were cleared and I had eaten reheated stuffing on the couch alone. My father called my brothers into the dining room and closed the door. I heard the low murmur of his voice through the wall. I heard my older brother laugh once, the short, satisfied laugh he saved for moments when something landed in his favor. The door opened 20 minutes later. My older brother came out first. He looked at me sitting on the couch with my plate and he said, "Dad's signing over the shop to us. Just so you know." He said it the way you tell someone the weather. Not unkind, exactly, just utterly indifferent to how the information might land. "Both of you?" I asked. "Yeah. Me and," he gestured toward the dining room where my younger brother was still talking with my father. "We're going to develop it, should pull decent money." I looked at my plate. "I showed Dad those projections, that was my work." He shrugged. "Dad said you moved away." I had moved 45 minutes away for a job. I had come home every holiday. I had called my mother every holiday. I had called my mother every Sunday. I had driven 4 hours in November traffic to eat stuffing alone on a couch. I put my plate in the kitchen sink, got my coat, and drove home. My father didn't call for 6 weeks. When he finally did, it was to ask if I knew a good contractor for the demolition permit. I let it go to voicemail. Then I sat in my apartment and felt something I can only describe as a door closing, not slamming, just quietly, firmly shutting, like a pressure change. I had been angry before in my life, but this was different. This was clarifying. I had been working at the real estate firm for 4 years by then, and I was good at it in a way I had never quite let myself say out loud. I had a feel for timing. Not just reading markets, but reading the space between what a thing was worth now and what it would be worth when everyone else finally caught up. My boss called it instinct. I called it paying attention. The garage lot sold for $2.1 million 18 months after that Thanksgiving. My brothers split it, paid off their mortgages, bought some things. My older brother posted a photo of a boat. I know the exact date the sale closed because I had been watching the listing. Not obsessively. Just the way you watch something you warned people about because you need to know whether you were right. I was right. That same month, I put in my notice. I'd been building something on the side for 2 years by then. It started because of a frustration I couldn't shake at work. The firm spent enormous amounts of time and money on due diligence, environmental reports, title searches, zoning histories, all of it processed by hand, cross-referenced across databases that didn't talk to each other. I had started writing scripts to automate pieces of it, just for myself, just to save time. Then a colleague saw what I was doing and asked if I could build it for their workflow. Then someone at another firm heard about it. By the time I quit my job, I had 11 paying clients and a product that worked. Not perfectly, but well enough that people were using it every day and complaining loudly when it went down, which I had learned was the truest sign that something mattered. I called the company Lantern. The name came from something my grandfather used to say. He would come into the machine shop when I was small and find me reading by the window, and he would set down whatever he was carrying and say, "You carry your own light, kid. Don't ever wait for someone to turn it on for you." He was not a sentimental man. He said it simply, the way he said everything, as a fact, not an encouragement. I believed him. I did not tell my family I had quit my job, not because I was hiding anything, but because I had stopped expecting them to be interested. My mother asked how work was going at Christmas that year, and I said, "Fine." And she moved on, and I felt nothing complicated about that exchange at all. The first 18 months were hard in the specific way that building something alone is hard. Not dramatic hardship, not crisis, just the relentless arithmetic of more going out than coming in, and the discipline of not flinching at it. I worked from my apartment. I took on freelance analysis projects to cover rent. I ate a lot of rice and black beans, which I actually liked, so that part was fine. I brought on my first employee, a developer I'd met at a meetup who had strong opinions about database architecture and a dry sense of humor I found steadying. 14 months after I launched, 2 months after that, we landed a mid-sized commercial brokerage in Denver as a client, and they referred us to 2 others. The referral chain is how most of our early growth happened. Nobody was writing about us. We were just quietly becoming something people in certain rooms relied on. I got a call from a VC firm in the spring of my 3rd year. They had heard about Lantern from one of our clients and wanted to take a meeting. I flew to San Francisco and sat in a conference room with 3 people who asked good questions, and I answered them, and at the end one of them said, "You've built something real here." She said it like she was slightly surprised, and I understood that, and I didn't hold it against her. We closed a Series A at $8.4 million. I did not post about it. I told my developer, who said ha and went back to his screen, which was the correct response. I went home and made pasta and watched something forgettable on TV, and in the morning I got up and went back to work. My mother saw an article about Lantern 6 months later, a short piece in a regional business publication, not even a major outlet. She texted me, "Is this you?" I wrote back yes. She didn't respond for 2 days, and then she sent a string of heart emojis, which I read as her not knowing what else to say. My father called that same week. First call in almost 2 years. "I saw the article," he said. "I know." A pause. "Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about that Thanksgiving. The 7 chairs, the stuffing, the door closing quietly in me. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I said. Which was the true answer, and he didn't push back on it. Which told me he understood exactly what I meant. We talked for 12 minutes. He asked careful questions about the business, the kind of questions you ask when you want to seem informed. At the end he said, "Your grandfather would have been proud." I said thank you when we hung up, and I sat for a while. The thing about complicated grief is that it doesn't announce itself cleanly. I wasn't sad exactly. I wasn't angry anymore either. I was something I don't have a perfect word for. Aware, maybe. Aware of the distance between what family is supposed to be and what it had actually been, and aware that no amount of money or recognition was going to close that distance. The article couldn't fix Thanksgiving. The funding couldn't fix the 7 chairs. But I was also aware that I had built something that was mine, that no one had helped me build, and that no one could retroactively claim credit for. That part felt clean. That part felt like solid ground. Lantern expanded into commercial lease analysis the following year. We brought on a head of sales, a woman who had spent a decade at a large brokerage and understood the industry from the inside, and who had a talent for explaining what we did to people who weren't sure they needed it until they saw it. She was the one who first used the phrase category defining in a pitch, which I found embarrassing and also accurate. We were a team of 11 when the first acquisition conversation happened. A larger prop-tech company reached out, not to buy us but to discuss a partnership. We talked for 2 months and decided it wasn't the right fit. I had learned enough from that process to know what we actually were, which is a thing most founders take longer to figure out. The real conversation came 2 years later, a publicly traded real estate technology platform. The kind of company whose name you'd recognize if you work in real estate or if you've ever read a business section, approached us through a banker. They were direct about what they wanted and why. Their own due diligence process was broken, they knew it, and we had solved the problem in a way they hadn't. The negotiation took 4 months. I had a good attorney and a banker I trusted, and I did not rush it, which is the only advice I would give anyone who has never done this before. Do not rush it. We closed at $310 million. I was 31 years old. My developer, who had stayed with me from that early apartment through 11 employees and 2 offices and 1 very bad quarter in year 4, came into my office after we got the final confirmation and said, "So?" Just that. "So?" I laughed, and he laughed, and we ordered the same burritos we'd been ordering from the same place since the beginning, and that was the celebration. The news broke in 3 outlets within 48 hours. Deal-related press and PropTech moves fast. My phone started ringing with numbers I didn't recognize, which I ignored. My inbox became something I couldn't look at directly. My older brother texted, "Huge congrats, we should catch up." My younger brother called and left a voicemail. I listened to it once. He said he'd always known I had it in me. He said, "Dad talks about you all the time now." He said they were all so proud. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. There are things I want to say here that I have to be careful about because they're complicated, and I don't want to perform a feeling I don't entirely have. I wasn't furious. I had used up fury years ago. What I felt was something colder and more precise. A recognition that the people who had not made room for me at their table were now making room in their narrative for my success. And I understood that this is what people do. It is human, and it is also hollow, and both of those things can be true at the same time. I called my mother back before I called either of my brothers. She cried on the phone, and her crying was real. I could hear that it was real. And I told her I was okay, and I was glad she knew, and I loved her. That part was also real. I met my father for coffee 3 weeks later. He chose the place, a diner near his house that he had been going to since before I was born. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He looked older. I noticed that first. He stood up when I came in, which he had never done before, and something about that gesture, the slight awkwardness of it, like he'd practiced it and wasn't sure he'd gotten it right, made something in me loosen slightly, not forgive, but soften around the edges. We ordered. We talked. He asked questions about the acquisition, good ones this time, specific ones, and I answered them honestly. He told me he'd been following Lantern for a while, quietly, looking it up sometimes. He didn't say he was sorry directly. My father is not a man who uses that word easily, but he said, "I should have listened to you about the property. You knew what you were looking at." He said it steadily, looking at his coffee cup. I said, "Yes, I did." Not to hurt him. Just because it was true and it needed to be said clearly, and I had learned, over the past several years, that clarity was a gift you could give someone even when it was uncomfortable. He nodded. Something moved in his face. "You did good," he said. "On your own." "I had people," I said. "I wasn't alone. What I didn't say was, I was alone from you." I thought it, but I didn't need him to carry that in addition to everything else. And I had also, somewhere in the years between Thanksgiving and this diner booth, arrived at a place where I didn't need him to feel the full weight of it in order for me to be okay. That was something I had worked through on my own time, in my own way, without an audience. The relationship with my father is not repaired. I want to be honest about that, because I think the stories we tell about families and money and success tend to tidy up the endings in ways that real life doesn't. We are in contact. We have had 4 or 5 conversations since that diner. They are careful conversations, not cold, not warm, somewhere in the middle. I think that is probably where we will stay, and I have made my peace with that. My brothers are different stories, both of them. My older brother, the one who told me about the garage like he was telling me the weather, reached out twice about investment opportunities after the acquisition was announced. I replied to both messages politely and without engaging. He hasn't pushed it. My younger brother is more complicated. He called again, about 6 weeks after the first voicemail, and we talked for almost an hour. He told me things about that Thanksgiving I hadn't known. That he had asked my father why I wasn't at the table and had been told it was just a space issue, and that he had believed that at the time because it was easier to believe it. He said he had thought about it since. He said he was sorry for not asking harder questions. I don't know yet what that will become. I'm still figuring it out. but it was the most honest conversation I had had with anyone in my family in a decade, and I'm holding it carefully, the way you hold something fragile, that you're not sure yet whether it's worth keeping. There is a woman at my former firm. She was a junior analyst when I was leaving, and she reached out to me last year to talk through starting something of her own. We've had 3 calls. She has a good idea and a sharp mind and a habit of qualifying everything she says, shrinking it down before anyone else can. I recognize that habit. I spent years practicing it. I told her what my grandfather told me about carrying your own light. She got quiet for a second and then said, "Did someone actually say that to you, or did you make it up?" I laughed. Someone actually said it to me. "That's lucky," she said. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up, whether it was luck or whether it was just that he saw something and said it plainly, without hedging, without waiting to see if I'd earned it first. I think that's what I've tried to do with the people around me since then, to say the true thing plainly, before they have to earn it. The acquisition closed on a Thursday. I drove to my grandfather's old neighborhood that weekend, not to the lot. The building had been gone for 3 years by then, replaced by a mixed-use development with a coffee shop on the ground floor. But to the block, just to stand on it. It was a warm day for March. There was a woman walking a dog. 2 kids on bikes. The coffee shop had a small line coming out the door. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes. I thought about the drill press, the smell of machine oil and sawdust, the way the afternoon light came through the high windows and fell across the concrete floor in long, pale rectangles. My grandfather in his work clothes, setting something down, looking at me with my book, and saying what he said. I didn't feel triumphant standing there. I want to say that clearly because I think the story that gets told about moments like that is a triumphant one, and mine wasn't. I felt something quieter. Something like, I did not let it stop me. Which is not the same as victory, but it is also not nothing. It is, maybe, enough. I walked to the coffee shop and ordered a black coffee and sat in the window and opened my laptop, and I got back to work. I thought a lot about what actually happened. Not the acquisition, not the number, but the chain of it. The way one thing led to another in a direction no one in that dining room could have predicted. Least of all me. My father made a decision at a Thanksgiving table based on what he thought he knew about me. He thought I was the one who had left, and because he believed that, he handed something valuable to the people who stayed visible, who showed up in the ways he recognized, who fit the shape of what he expected. He wasn't a cruel man. He was a man who had a fixed picture of how things worked, and I didn't fit it, and he didn't think to question the picture. That decision cost me nothing I couldn't rebuild. But it also freed me in a way I didn't understand at the time. When there's nothing being held over you, when the inheritance has already been given away and the table only has 7 chairs, you stop waiting. That's the thing nobody talks about, how clarifying it is when the door closes. You stop angling for a seat you're not going to get, and you go find a different room entirely. What I built was Lantern was built out of a real problem I understood in my bones, because I had spent years paying attention when no one was watching. That's the part I want to sit with. The attention. My grandfather taught me something when I was small that I didn't fully understand until much later. That the work of seeing clearly, of actually looking at what's in front of you without needing it to confirm what you already believe, is a discipline. It's not a gift. It's a choice you make every day, especially when the people around you are choosing not to look. My older brother looked at that property and saw a payout. My father looked at it and saw a legacy for his sons. I looked at it and saw a pattern, the rezoning lines, the demographic shift, the timing. Same piece of land, 3 entirely different things depending on where you had trained your eyes to go. That's not intelligence exactly. It's something closer to intellectual honesty. The willingness to follow what the evidence shows you, even when it leads somewhere inconvenient, even when no one else in the room is following it with you. It's uncomfortable. It made me seem like I was complicating things, which is what my father said. But that discomfort, that willingness to sit with what's actually true instead of what's easier, is what I built a company on. And the other thing, the part about my younger brother, about that hour-long phone call where he said he should have asked harder questions. I think about that differently now than I did at first. What he was describing was a failure of courage that he'd carried for years quietly. He knew something was wrong at that table. He chose not to push on it. And I think the reason he called, the reason he said what he said, is that carrying that kind of silence eventually gets too heavy. Character isn't just about what you do in the big moments. It's about whether you're willing to name a small wrong when it's still small, before it becomes something you have to apologize for years later. I don't say that to punish him, I say it because I think it's the most useful thing I know. The moment you notice something is wrong is almost always earlier than the moment you say so. The gap between those two moments is where a lot of damage happens. Closing that gap, in yourself, in how you treat the people around you, is the work. Not the dramatic gesture, not the reconciliation scene. Just the daily practice of saying the true thing at the time it needs to be said. I'm still learning that. I don't have it down, but I know it matters more than the number.